welcome to the Weekly Artifact. I'm Justin, and this is my co-host.
Hi, I'm Alex.
We're two former creative writing majors searching for meaning in a sea of content. Every other week, we will select one piece of content each, an article, a video, another podcast, that we found particularly interesting and discuss it. As always, our comments are our own and are not associated with any institution.
The show may contain explicit language or themes. See the show notes for specific content warnings. Justin, what's your artifact for the week?
This week, my artifact, perhaps the first true artifact of the show, is an article by Susie Chase called "Should We Forgive Jon Stewart?" So this one comes from 2015 from the website Susan's Place. I was listening to a different podcast, the Current Affairs podcast, which is actually a very good podcast. Anyways, they were doing their own segment where they sort of went back and looked at some cultural moments that had maybe been forgotten. And just in passing, they didn't even talk about this one. They sort of like threw it out in passing, was a transphobic remark that Jon Stewart had made. And so I had to go through, we can get to the reaction that perhaps both of us had upon hearing that, but I had to go through and see what they were talking about. And so I came across this article. And so basically the article talks about a comment that Jon Stewart had made. So the comments came in the lead up to the 2004 Democratic primary. And so even at the time that the article was written, it was more than a decade ago, the writer says that it makes up for what lacks in currency by the magnitude of its hostility, offensiveness, and denigration of our worth as human beings. We'll get to this aspect as well, but the clip is still up on Comedy Central, so like anyone can still watch it, and I would encourage you to as well. But it sort of gives like a brief description in this article where Stewart basically says, he's going through different comments the different candidates have made regarding gay marriage and LGBT issues, and then says that one of the candidates has said the craziest thing that he's heard during the cycle, which is when Dennis Kucinich said that he'd be willing to nominate a transgender person to the Supreme Court. And Jon Stewart, the remark Jon Stewart makes about this, and you'll have to excuse me, this is his quote, is "Yes, yes, all rise for the honorable justice chick with dick," which like it's a very out of body, surreal sort of experience to hear the quote. But yeah, we'll go back into. I just want to finish getting through the article. So Susie Chase, the author of the article, says it is the single most offensive thing I've ever heard on TV. And in 9 words, Stewart manages to use an extremely derogatory and profane term for a pre-op trans woman, reduce our identity to the state of our genitals, and imply that we lack the competence to execute positions of power and responsibility. She talks about the 2 most common excuses people offer when Susie shows it to them. One is that it was just one statement. I don't think he really believes that. And Susie Chase points out that single statements have taken down other people. Donald Sterling, if you remember then, had one comment, a very racist comment regarding Magic Johnson that lost him his NBA franchise. And then Lawrence Summer, as the president of Harvard, lost his job over a sexist comment he made. And the other excuse is that it was many years ago. So Susie points out that people have gone back and apologized for things that happened a while ago. The example she uses is somewhat unfortunate for reasons that I had to sort of look into, but she says that Gloria Steinem apologized for some transphobic remarks she had made. Now, little fun fact, Gloria Steinem actually works for the CIA, and we'll never be able to probably confirm this 100%, but it's alleged that she's actually works to try and break up a lot of these radical feminist groups, and she's sort of like a plant.
Jesus Christ.
Anyways, that's just... But, regardless, ignore that Steinem is the feds for a moment. The point is that she went in and apologized for some transphobic remarks she'd made. And so finally, to get to the main question of the article, do we forgive Jon Stewart? Susie says she looked into whether or not Stewart had apologized, couldn't find any examples of that, sent out an email to Comedy Central, did not hear a reply from them. So yeah, so no effort for him to apologize, apparently. And Susie says when it comes to an entire class of people, and when the remark gives an endorsement to prejudicial attitudes towards these people, I'm far less inclined to advocate letting Stewart off the hook, as opposed to if he had just offended perhaps a single individual rather than group. But Susie says that she would continue to sort of watch Stewart, but with a bitter taste of hate somewhere in the back of my mouth. I've already given a little bit of commentary on it, so I guess I'll let you speak on it, Alex. What was your reaction when you first? I mean, I guess I sent you the article, and that's probably the first. But what do you think, sort of like as you opened up the article and started going through it?
Hey, I'm gonna be honest, it kind of fucked me up. This is a joke I might have made in 2004, but I was also 8. So,
Uh-huh.
because it's just a dude like running, like saying, like, yeah, I don't care if you're homosexual or transgender, like, you can be on the Supreme Court. And he's like, well, isn't that just an insane thing to say from somebody that doesn't have a shot in hell actually getting the presidency? Like, that's fucking fuck. Calling it the craziest thing said during the particular debate is really, I think, like, hits me like the worst, because like it doesn't mean anything. Like, it's so irrelevant to like the position that they're referring to. Like, it's just weird to me.
Mm-hmm.
I just really, it sort of floored me, to be honest.
It's on. It's still up on Comedy Central's main site. You could still find it there. Season 8, episode 9 of the Daily Show. I don't care if they necessarily want keep the video up. I mean, it's a thing that happened and it was said, but it's surprising that they both kept it up and also did not apologize for it. You'd think they would do. You think they would either have taken it down or at least would have kept it up, but said, we apologize for this or something, but we're keeping it up, so we don't erase our history or something, even though it's bad. But they would just keep it up and then not.
Just fuck it.
Yeah, is just very strange. But yeah, it's almost like you get almost a sensation of like time traveling or going to some parallel universe when you look at it, just because you think there's just no way that Jon Stewart could say something so transphobic for no reason, like you said.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Just
it's like the bit was like completely like there's no flow to it, really. It's like, let's just go to this fucking batshit thing this guy said, right? Like, it's 30 seconds. It didn't need to happen. Like,
But yeah, I guess coming out of the video, one thing I wondered was if there's anything that people that we think about as actually being on the left now, are there things that they say that we'll look back on in 16 years, 15 years, whatever, and have the similar reaction of, oh, I can't believe they would say something like that. I can't really think of anything. I mean, there are people who are like, people already call them out, but for like Bill Maher or something, like I think Bill Maher thinks that he's like on the left or something, even though he says like the most
Christ.
vile racist things. And so
Bill Maher's a fucking mess. I want to go on record saying Bill Maher's a fucking mess.
so like 15 years from now, you'll only just have more people who are like, oh yeah, like obviously Bill Maher was always racist. But Jon Stewart, he's not like the furthest cultural left figure that we have, and so I'm trying to think if there's any like who the equivalent to that figure would be, and like if there's anything that they would say now that we would just look back and be shocked by it. But I think the other aspect of it too is just that I would assume that probably even at the time there was people who could have pointed out how wrong this comment was, and they're just probably marginalized. I think about this a lot, like in the context of slavery, when people say, like, "Oh, well, that's just what people thought back then." But really, there's always been people who knew slavery was wrong. It just took a
Right.
while for people to come on board with them. And so I would assume that's sort of the same thing here. But yeah, I didn't look into it enough to be able to see if there was any sort of condemnation at the time. there actually wasn't like the podcast I said was like the podcast I was listening to said it really is like a forgotten sort of cultural moment, and there really is not. If you just Google it, there's not a lot that's written about this. You won't really find anything pieces about this. Yeah, Susie just has an interesting sort of idea about forgiveness. I think I'm tempted to say that they're more forgiving than I would be. I'm trying to sort of put myself in their shoes to say, like for me, I guess it would be what if Stewart had said, what if someone had said, I'm thinking about nominating a black person to the Supreme Court, and Stewart had said that's crazy and like made fun of it. Would I continue to watch Stewart just with a bitter taste of hate? No, I think I would just not continue to watch him at all. But I don't. Maybe that's not like the most apt comparison because I think transgender rights are more recent than black rights, just in terms of not in terms of like their actual sort of genealogy, but in terms of like when they sort of like hit the cultural mainstream. And so I can sort of see a transgender person perhaps being more forgiving just on that sort of aspect. Maybe is where Susie's coming from. I'm not sure. But I am inclined to say that I would not be as forgiving as Susie is. But I don't know what you thought about that.
I'm trying to think because like I don't know. I'm not sure like what if it, I don't think there's any personal check Jon Stewart could make against my like identity that would make me stop watching it. But that's my privilege.
Maybe if he said he would nominate like an ugly person to the Supreme Court or something.
Yeah, only people that submit their homework on time are allowed in the Supreme Court. I would riot. But what I like was her sort of the distinction she made about like who gets what benefits out of like deciding when to forgive. Like if it's like a one-on-one, she says that she largely believes that in the cases where a personal slight from one individual to another is involved, the valuable wisdom that forgiveness is more for the person doing the forgiving. Like, the ability just to, like to move on and not keep the resentment like to damage you personally. But when it's on such like a large scale about like an entire group of people, it's the onus is most certainly on the transgressor being Stewart. And I like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's just a reminder to sort of be aware, it happens all the time, and just be aware of the people who are making the sort of critiques of these types of comments and to not dismiss them. There's a lot of people who are might be considered outside the Overton window of what I guess probably the easiest way to think about it is just if you think of like people who will complain about too much political correctness or something. If you're that type of person, you end up being like Jon Stewart from 2003. Like in 15 years, people will look back and say, why were you defending this thing? So just listen to the people who are making the critiques. Time will prove them correct. All right, Alex, so what's your artifact this week?
So mine is an article from Time magazine called Why Your Doctor Probably Has a Do Not Resuscitate Order by Brian Walsh. And it's talking about sort of end-of-life intensive care treatment. So the article is based on a new study in the PLOS One medical journal, which, I mean, not new to us, but new to the article. It came out a few years ago. It found that 88.3% of doctors surveyed reported that they would choose to forgo aggressive end-of-life treatment, including intubations, dialysis, feeding tubes, invasive tests that a lot of Americans receive, like in the last sort of stretch of their lives in hospitals hooked up to machines. The statistics they give is, a quarter of the total Medicare budget is spent on the last year of a recipient's life, and 40% of that money within the quarter of the whole budget going to the final 30 days. So, I mean, approximately 10% of all of the money in the Medicare budget is going to the last month of patients' lives, which is a lot of money. It's billions and billions of dollars, just because Americans a lot of fucking people and money. But again, and so the disparity. But they interview people too, and they say about 80% of patients say they wish to avoid the frequent hospitalizations and high intensity care at the end of their lives. But the difference is most people don't do, like the do not resuscitate orders or have a sort of living will for how they want to be taken care of if they are sick with a terminal illness. And so, well, the question is, why are so many Americans dying in exactly the opposite fashion that both they and the doctors want? And then the article says to blame the same medical technology that has helped Americans live longer than ever before, where hospitals and doctors are reimbursed for carrying out procedures regardless of the end result. With the quote saying from Dr. probably not going to pronounce this right, but Harry Coyle, who ran the PLOS One research study that the article is based on, saying the quote, the default of the medical system is to doing all things possible technological care. It simply doesn't make it easy to do the right thing because that's, where the money is by running all these expensive tests and charging the patient the insurance sort of indefinitely. The doctor also notes that students are taught to extend their patient's life if at all possible, but they are not taught in medical school how to speak to their patients and families about the reality of end-of-life care. And it's especially important because elderly, terminally ill patients are rarely in a position where they're capable of expressing their wishes, which too often leaves the decision up to the closest family members who, in situations like this, are usually sort of emotionally compromised with the sort of facing the death of a loved one and, making the most financially smart decisions, but even just the most, medically practical or humane decisions for these loved ones who can't speak for themselves or say what they would like, just for, a small slimmer of hope that they could get better, even though that's probably not even an option in the first place by the time it gets to this point. The doctor says she published this study in part to show ordinary people what their doctors actually thought about intensive end-of-life care, with the hopes that they would reconsider the need to extend the lives of their loved ones at all costs. The article ends saying it's projected that 26.1% of the U.S. population will be over 65 by 2030, up from the 12.8% now. And if intensive care remains the norm, costs will continue to balloon, while the elderly and the terminally ill will continue to suffer needlessly, as will their doctors, standing witness to that pain that they don't personally subscribe to. I had to listen to an NPR article saying, the first thing I heard, which surprised me, which was that most doctors, this thing, like most doctors don't want these things. And, if they're in a position where they need to even be given something like CPR, they would rather die, because CPR, even though like how pervasive it is in the culture with like how we see it being used in like movies and television and things, very like it doesn't work. Like the majority of the time CPR doesn't revive anybody, but when it does, you usually get broken rib cage, can puncture your lungs and make you honestly even worse off than if they hadn't done anything at all. And so things like that, like things that doctors know that they would never, want done to themselves, but that people like insist on having done because they see it work on TV. But everybody sort of knows, but maybe doesn't necessarily appreciate that's not how it works in the real world. And so this sort of idea, once I heard that, it sort of really drew my curiosity as to what doctors want. I mean, if you're going to ask an expert about what they would like, you'd start there, I would think. We've talked about more people dying in hospitals than, in their own homes and things like that, and sort of trying their damnedest to live as long as possible at the expense of even enjoyment of life, just the number as opposed to the quality. But I will yield the floor to you.
So I think the first thought I have is that, I don't know, I think doctors do have a certain insight into this issue, obviously, as doctors, but I wonder if the doctors would feel the same way if it was actually literally do or die time. I think it's a lot easier to sort of say when you're healthy, I don't want to be resuscitated or have this long drawn out. And I think it's probably a lot more difficult when you're actually at the end to say like, yeah, no, I still feel that way. Like I'm ready to go. And then even the 80% of patients, I was hoping that they would be a little bit more specific about exactly what they meant. I wasn't sure if that meant patients who are currently receiving that sort of end of life treatment, or are these like just regular patients, or is this survey done in the hospital? I wasn't exactly sure how this survey was conducted or who the subjects of this survey were. but yeah, I guess I feel sort of the same way, sort of depending on how it was done. But would that 80% still be that high if they were actually at the end of their lives, where I assume they probably would not be in the state to take the survey, so I kind of assume that they're not at the end of their life. But then it also raises questions, sort of similar questions that we brought up. Who is sort of the whole death process for? Is it, in some ways, yes, I think you should be able to control, have a say over when you want to sort of pass on versus when you want to sort of be, have efforts made to keep you alive. But I think once you are sort of out of a position, if you are unable to sort of communicate what you want to have happen, then who does get to decide? And so it's probably, obviously the people around you, whoever those people are the ones who ultimately have to decide on that. And even if you, I guess if you decide to fill out the paperwork or whatever to say do not resuscitate, I guess that's sort of the best thing we have to go off of, but that still doesn't necessarily mean that you feel the same way at that point as you did when you signed the paperwork. So yeah, I think it's a little bit too maybe simple to sort of say, well, doctors say they wouldn't do this, so it must be bad. But I definitely, with that said, though, I do think that the end of life can often be drawn out in ways it doesn't have to be. Yeah, I'm just not sure. People die in very different ways sometimes. Yeah, you probably aren't going to have high quality of life in any sort of like hospice or even hospital situation. You're not adding like quality time onto your life. You're just sort of adding time on. So I guess that's a sort of like a separate question of, is that time for time's sake worthwhile, or does it have to be somewhat more enjoyable? I don't have like a very strong takeaway other than it would be interesting if you could somehow find out how do people who are actually at the end of their life feel. But of course, we'll probably never know, because it's usually the people once you're at the end of your life in that sort of mode where you need to be resuscitated, like you're not going to be able to say how you feel. Although maybe, I don't know, perhaps some people who are resuscitated might be able to tell you that they would rather not have been.
Right.
But
For that, you're right. That 80% patient number is sort of very loose and vague. But for the doctors, it does say, I don't know if this changes your opinion at all, but I mean, it's not even for sort of the do or die. This is exclusively like related to, at least for them, when they're already are dying of a terminal illness. So theoretically, there is no saving it. It's just lengthening it regardless. I mean, I don't know. And like, if I'm sure more of them would be willing to do sort of these very painful, invasive surgeries if there was like a potential of making it out. But with the idea of a terminal illness, like regardless, it's just, I think it becomes a question of quality or quantity. And I mean, everybody's answer is their own and not right or wrong. You can just say like, yeah, keep me alive as long as possible. Like, fuck this shit. Like, I didn't like pay all this insurance money my whole life just to kick the bucket when I like my heart stopped for 1 second. Like, you give me every MRI and CAT scan and tube you can. Like, fuck that shit. Like, I'm getting my money's worth, and that's fine. But you should. This is a conversation you should have. And I mean, it can be in the moment, but it can also just be like you go to the doctor and you find out you have stage 3 or 4 like cancer of some kind, and so you're not gonna die that day necessarily, but I mean, clock is ticking. So
yeah, I just think my larger point is just there could be these people who want to sort of prolong life just on the notion that, who knows what tomorrow holds, literally or metaphorically tomorrow, but maybe they hold on to some sort of belief that even though their condition's terminal right now, maybe if they hold on longer, it will no longer be terminal.
I mean, sounds like raw cowardice, but that's fine. All right, Justin. Well, so I guess I will ask you what you would choose for a DNR if you were found to be say you were terminally ill with ass cancer and you had 6 months to live, no matter what, really. This is real up your ass, stage 7 ass cancer. You're going to be dead. It's terminal. You can either be dead in 6 months if you just like let it just grow throughout the rest of your ass, or you do chemotherapy to try to shrink the ass cancer, and you get maybe like 1.5 to 2 years instead, or something like that.
And so you're saying 6 months versus 2 years?
We'll say 2 years with it, but with pretty intensive chemo.
How old am I? My age right now?
Both. We'll do both. We'll do your age right now, and then say you're like 70.
If I'm my age right now, I'm definitely extending. If I'm 70, yeah, I might just go with the 6 months. Because then you can at least maximize the 6 months because you wouldn't be debilitated as much by the chemo. But if I'm my age now, I think there'd be more stuff to do so I could fill up the 2 years.
So chemo, young man chemo, but if you're older, you'd rather just die in the comfort and safety of your own room.
No, I mean, I'm like going skydiving and stuff. I'm not just gonna be in my
You're
room,
not skydiving. When you do die, you're well, maybe you'll die from skydiving, but when you finally go out, it won't. If you were to die, your deathbed will not be in a hospital.
Yeah, I guess so. I
Justin,
don't
I'm
know.
trying to do a transition so I can use the phrase safe room and then we can just go to the safe room. And now this whole thing unedited is the transition to the safe room. So fucking congratulations.
This wasn't my idea. So now that we're in the safe room after our long voyage, what's on your mind, Alex?
So on my mind this week is, and this was timely, and I might just put this episode. We might just put this episode out next because this is both of our safe rooms are pretty not time sensitive but timely with the Notre Dame and the extendedly long
I thought we were
movies.
just gonna double down forever on being 5 months
Mine
behind.
is timely for when we recorded this. My safe room is timely for at the time of recording, not necessarily the time of publication. But I am sick of movies being over 2 hours. I think 2 hours is a safe. I'm gonna say it's not even conservative, just reasonable limit of how long a standard film should be. This is whether, regardless if it's a blockbuster or a rom-com or a drama, comedy, action flick. And action movies shouldn't be over an hour and a half, but that's neither here nor there. Mostly it's just movies have more and more, I think, on obviously like more and more on average have gotten longer recently. Like I remember our one professor telling us, I think you were in that class, but he was saying how like movies used to be like these huge drama like epics because like when you went to the theater it was like a whole day, like you made a day out of it. There was like intermission and shit and you like wore a suit, and then it got to like the sort of blockbuster fanfare of the 70s, and then like a minute, like if any every minute over an hour and a half like was like eating up theater time because they were just trying to get asses in seats like in and out. And then like we've like gone sort of back the other way where movies have gotten like longer in the last like few years or so, like maybe like last decade or so. And obviously there's always been outliers, but at this point in time, after seeing one too many particularly long movies, when I go in to a film and know that it's over 2 hours, I will not mentally check out from watching it, but while I'm watching it, I'm like figuring out like, oh, I could have edited this, like could have been cut, this needed to get edited here, like this could be, I'm trying to make this under 2 hours in my head, which is pretty cocky for just somebody sitting in a theater. But I think that could maybe just lend itself to more. And I mean, being theoretically both of us being creative people, like that's like a shitty thing to like somebody be like reading your book saying like you can cut this chapter, but we've been through that. I mean, that's part of like the editing. That is literally the editing process, is like knowing what is and is what should and shouldn't be there. And I mean, this is entertainment. Like you should maintain your attention. I mean, it doesn't need to be like in your face and like always like fun or easy going. But if your audience is bored because it's gone on too long and the pacing sucks, then you're losing whatever point you're trying to make anyways.
Yeah, I think there's probably some movies that are longer than 2 hours that are good. I can't name them off the top of my head. I think although I think Goodfellas was more than 2 hours.
Goodfellas is extremely long, and that is my favorite movie, so that's immediately like a point against me. But
There's definitely a good number of films that could have been better if they were shorter. Uh, but there are certainly exceptions.
the two, well, I'll do two like pretty recent films, and then one older film. But I'll start with the older film because this is sort of what like sort of made me like realize like, oh yeah, I don't need to like, this doesn't have to be here. I don't have to watch this. Like I like Pulp Fiction is the older film, which I mean came out in 94, so it's been 25 years ago. And the part of that film that needs to get edited out, which is not to say all of Butch's slash Bruce Willis's arc, but the entire like motel blueberry pancake scene is useless, and I can't stand it. And I was talking to a teacher about this, and he was like, "Yeah, every time that part comes on, I just fast forward through it." I was like, "Holy shit! Why did I never think of that?" Like, like you just don't have to watch the parts, and so maybe that part shouldn't be there because it's dumb. And that's like I don't know how long that is, but that movie's like 2 hours and like 45 minutes or some shit, and that is at least like 15 minutes. I mean, you get to see a little bit of Bruce Willis's dick, so maybe it's worth it. But
I don't even remember this scene. I'm not as big of a Pulp Fiction fan as most people. I think it's one of Tarantino's lesser films, like by a long shot.
that's like not actually a bad take. I'm gonna be honest with you. It probably like it's quotable as fuck. That's where a lot of it comes from.
Hmm.
But there's because it's all disconjointed, so I don't even know what happens between it, you know. But like it's Bruce Willis, his character is like in a motel room with his like very French girlfriend. They're talking about how he's like got to just go to this fight or whatever, and then they're gonna he has to go get some money or some shit. And she's like, and then we can eat blueberry pancakes until I have a pot belly. And I was just like, what the fuck? That's a direct quote.
Oh,
And
I
like
think I do remember this scene.
you shouldn't like the reason there's a reason you have to like remember it. Like nobody forgets the gimp in the fucking basement of the pawn shop. You forget the blueberry pancakes. Anyway, so like that's an example of like some pretty hard edits that can go, but a lot of Tarantino could use editing sort of all over. As a fan of Tarantino, you could probably use consistent editing. But the two more recent ones is most egregiously is The Last Jedi, just as a very bad film. But the entire B plot can get cut from that fucking movie of the casino shit. And honestly, but also like I don't know what the A plot is because we've talked about this. If the casino is probably the C plot, that can get cut. The B plot is Rey training, or the B plot is the sort of endless, slow, steady space chase, and like probably that can get cut too, and like just like Rey training with Luke. I think like I don't. There's not like nothing happens in that film. The whole film could probably get cut. Now that I say that.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the point you're leading
Yeah,
to.
as I was talking myself up to. I wasn't even planning to get there. Like I just talked myself up to the entire film of The Last Jedi can get cut, and fuck that saves. Let's see, 2 hours and 33 minutes. So I just saved 2 hours and 33 minutes. But a better film that should remain a film, but can use some more editing also, is Blade Runner 2049, which comes in at an even tighter 2 hours and 44 minutes. Jesus fuck. And the number one thing that movie that can get cut is the entire like all the sequences with like his like AI robot Joy. Like was wholly useless. The whole payoff was a quiet 3-second scene of like him realizing that this automated robot is actually just an automated robot and doesn't actually care about him. But like, God, we could have gotten there a lot sooner than like 3 like dinner dates and like all this bullshit. And there's a lot of like long, slow tracking scenery shots, and that's like how Ridley Scott did the first Blade Runner, so that's fine. But there's a lot of them, and if you shaved 5 seconds off of each 30-second, I'm pretty sure we can get down to 2 minutes, like of the whole film, because there was a lot of that shit in that movie too. But that's sort of like where I'm at. Like I walked into I saw Blade Runner a few times in theaters, and by the second time I was like, yeah, that can go, that can go. That can go. Like you're just, and I mean, the point is obviously you don't want to sacrifice the integrity of the whole film. And if you can literally look at something and be like, this is useless to the rest of the plot, it shouldn't be there in the first place. So anyway, that's mine. Keep a movie under 2 hours as an aspiring like writer and just enjoying the idea of being a filmmaker. I've done nothing to pursue this like passion, but just it sounds like a good thing that I would like to do. Keep it under 2 hours, please, for everybody's sake, including your own, as a creative person trying to like keep getting jobs.
Yeah, agreed.
So that's me. What do you got, Justin? What do you want to vent about safely in a room?
Alright, so this week I want to touch on a certain aspect of the Notre Dame fire. Now, I don't want to minimize the loss of the Notre Dame spire, because I do think there's some value in preserving cultural monuments, even though in this particular case Notre Dame has a somewhat problematic past. Notre Dame's associated with the expulsion of the Jews and the burning of various Jewish texts. But nevertheless, it's still a cultural artifact that's worth preserving. But I do still think that there is some value in being able to appreciate the humor in the event. Imagining, the Yelp review that this renovation company is going to get. I've heard that this is actually just Disney filming the live action remake of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And of course, most of the Hunchback jokes were not funny, but the one about the Hunchback forgetting to stomp out his blunt was also a little bit funny, I will admit. But
like
I'm not here to roast Notre Dame, no pun intended. But
too soon.
But my actual safe room to get there is, I don't know if you've seen these people on Facebook who are doing their best humble brags, talking about, oh, I can't believe Notre Dame burned down, but I'm glad I was able to get there before it burned, and check out all these selfies I took. It's like, I'm not really sure how we're supposed to react to those. Like, oh, this is such a tragedy, but that is a pretty good selfie you took there. Like, nice job. I'm not exactly sure what reaction they're going for. I just feel like if we wanted to see pictures of Notre Dame, we could just Google them. I don't necessarily need to see you giving a thumbs up sign in front of the building to remember what it looked like. There are, actual pictures of it that exist.
It's a lot better without your fucking face in the middle.
And honestly, it's not even that they are posting pictures of themselves at Notre Dame. It's the fact that it is a humble brag. If you're going to do it, just make it a brag. Just say, haha, I got to see Notre Dame and you didn't. I'm better than you, and post it up. There's no reason.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah, there's no reason to pretend that you're just trying to remember and honor the tragedy. No, just say that you think you're better than us, and let's go.
Commit to it. Be an adult.
Yeah. So I just my point is just that go ahead and brag about being able to see Notre Dame if that's what you want to do. Just don't half step it. Just go out and brag about it. But yeah, really, all these Notre Dame selfies need to come to a quick end. I'm trying to think what national treasure do I need to burn down so I can post up my selfie.
I don't know if I have any photos of any national treasures.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't have too much to say about this. You have any thoughts on the spire burning down?
I theoretically I agree with you. That cultural buildings shouldn't be actively destroyed, but when it happens, it's fine. Like I was trying to think of because there's this one kid that was a history major who was walking around the law school when it happened, just so distraught, just out of his he was just he was literally shambling around like a zombie, and he was like, Notre Dame's burning, and I was with a group of kids and we're like, what? He goes, it's burning down, and he just sort of walked off to go tell somebody else, and it was absolutely devastating. He was Thomas Aquinas studied there, and he just left the room, and I was like, shut the fuck up. It's fine, but I do not have a Notre Dame. I'm pretty sure. And we sort of went around the group oh, what would put you in such like a bad shape as he's in right now. And then two people simultaneously said like, I don't know, Chipotle. And I was like, yeah, I mean something closer to that. It would have to like a local restaurant that I like would devastate me way more than literally any like thing that you would build in like a civilization game for points. Like I don't know if I have one. And so like it's not great that it burned because like I don't know, but like I would only be upset if somebody like actively destroyed it. Like if it was like a terrorist thing, like that's not great, but it seems like it was like an accident. I don't know. It's as much a word as it is a building. Like it's on par. Like it's just an idea. It's abstract to me. I don't care. I like would probably honestly the thing that would probably upset me the most is like maybe the Lincoln Memorial and like somewhat because I'd been there, but also because like Lincoln was dope. But like I don't really get like relatively dope. I got some things to say about people's opinion on Lincoln, but we'll get to that later. That's another safe room.
Yeah, no, Notre Dame had a good run, so yeah, I'm not too torn up about it.
Yeah, it's been so long. It's fine. There are a lot of cultural, like you mentioned before, with like the Jewish text, like a lot of cultural touchstones have been lost before, actively, intentionally, from people of like French and other like European like nationalities that I would give just as much, if not more, of a shit because they're from like my country. If only the landmass, not the idea of like America. But I don't know. Like it's fine. Maybe European history bores me more because I've been so like inundated with it since like day one. But it's fine. They'll be okay. They got billionaires at the asshole just paying for it, so fuck them. That only made it worse for me, honestly. Like it wasn't like a comeback kid story. It was just like a pouring money down the throat of it until it gets better. Like I don't care.
Yeah. All right, yeah. So that's our show for this week. See the show notes for a link to view the artifacts yourself.
Music for the podcast was produced by Nicholas Pizzuto.
Rate us 5 stars on iTunes. Tell a friend, tell an enemy about the show, and join us again in 2 weeks as we find 2 new texts to discuss.
Justin, can I ask you a quick question?
Mm.
Which one of our very good presidents mocked a reporter for having cerebral palsy during his run?
He who shall not be named.